wonder what is real. Is this really what I feel? Is it what I've been searching for? So now what do I do? Well, I guess there's only one thing. There's something I'd like to know. Are you real? Can you feel? This seems too good to be true.
Good evening and welcome to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Guys, I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars. And as always, you know how we rock on this show. We always have interesting guests. We always talk about serious topics. We do not waste your time with gossip and all of these kind of frivolous things that just takes everybody's energy away. But this evening, as usual, we have a very important topic. Now, you guys have previously met Ms. KRIS BARNEY, and as you know, she is a domestic violence survivor. Sadly, she lost her baby due to domestic violence, and she's going to give us a little recap about that as well. She'll be talking about, GWEN'S law, which again is a domestic violence tragedy that KRIS happened to be involved personally. It was her sister-in-law, a former sister-in-law, I should say, as you can see in the background. So we need you guys just to sit back, relax, and understand that this is a very serious topic, and domestic violence is, quite frankly, just off the charts, and it's just really running rampant, even though the numbers have come down in Louisiana. At one time, we were number one, and I think now we're like maybe 2 or 3 or something of that nature. But just think about across the nation and across the country. If you talk about Louisiana being number one or even in the top, whatever, you have cities like New York and Las Vegas and Los Angeles and Cleveland, Ohio, and I mean, just on and on and on. Wow, it's just crazy. And we're talking about just in our state. So GWEN'S law came about as a direct result of domestic violence and the sad loss of life through domestic violence right here in Louisiana. You know, not in some, as when I was a boy, they would call it these highfalutin states, not in some of the highfalutin states, guys. So as you will agree, I'm sure that this is a very serious topic, and we want to again introduce our very gracious and wonderful guest, Mrs. KRIS BARNEY. Good evening, Ms. Barney. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I am great. Thank you once again for having me on your show. I am so deeply grateful, Mr. Lars, for you having me tonight again.
Well, listen, we're happy that you're here, and it's very crucial, quite honestly. Oprah needs to have you, even though she may not be there. The View should have you, and these major shows, because what you are speaking on and what you're sharing is a lived experience. Now, a lot of people, as you well know, KRIS, talk about things that they have heard about, or maybe some things that they have read, or even maybe some things they've experienced, but not to the point where there was a loss of life and a loss of several lives and the crushing effects that it can have. So I just, again, want to say, you know, The View and all of these other shows need to have you there to speak on your platform. So I am saying, just like these thumbs and hearts continue to go up, just like our last show, I am saying that we need to get you on the major platforms as well. But we are thankful and gracious and happy that you are here with us. So as we jump into this topic, if you will, if you just kind of give us a little recap on some of the things that we discussed in the first meeting. I know it's painful to keep revisiting this, but, you know, just the loss of your baby and that kind of thing. If you just kind of talk with us a little bit about that before we move on and talk about GWEN'S law.
Sure. So just a recap of what we discussed last time. We talked about how I was in a domestic violence situation with my ex-husband, Charles Sally Jr., who was a Bossier City firefighter. I had been fighting him for, a few years, trying to get supervised visitation, getting people to believe me that I was in danger and that Miranda, my sweet daughter, was in danger. I couldn't get anyone to help me, anyone to believe me. He was arrested and convicted of stalking, with no consequences, of course. He was also granted joint custody and was able to keep his job at the fire department, even though there was evidence that he was stalking me. No consequences whatsoever. And then on a scheduled visit, he ultimately killed our daughter. She was 3 years old, and he also killed another woman who was also escaping his abuse. She and I both had gone to his chief, his parole officer, to get help, and to police. We had done everything correct. We had done everything that had been asked of us to get help, and nobody would help us. Nobody would believe us, mainly because there was no evidence of physical violence. And back then, it was very difficult to prove that you were in a domestic violence situation when there was no evidence of physical violence. He was never physically abusive, but he always threatened to kill me and my family, my dogs, and Miranda. And he made true on that promise one night. And which brings us here. Now, police did end up shooting and killing him because it was his plan to commit suicide by cop after he killed our precious daughter and the woman who had recently broken up with him. So,
Wow. Wow.
yes.
Well, Chris, I have to tell you, it's which I'm sure you know by now. Just like with the first show we did a couple of weeks ago, you know, it's a very emotional time, and I keep looking at the monitor because, you know, it's just being flooded with tears right now, and it's being flooded with hearts and that kind of thing. And as you're sharing this, I think sometimes, Chris, and you may disagree, and please, and let's please talk about this before we move on to Gwen's Law, Chris, is that people sometimes, even now in 2024, have a tendency to ignore domestic violence and think that it's okay, and, you know, make ignorant, and I will say ignorant, make ignorant statements like, well, you know, you just have to hang in there, and maybe they just had a bad day and that kind of thing. How would you address that?
Domestic violence, when there has been violence in the home, or threats of violence, or mental and emotional and abuse, it is not because someone has had a bad day. That domestic violence, mental and emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, that is something that is caused by, it's a learned behavior. It is something that the perpetrator has learned and has been indoctrinated into their psyche. It is something that we are teaching our children as they are coming up. It is something that they are learning through social media, through video games, the music that we allow our children to listen to. And it is proven, and it is fact, that boys who are raised in an abusive household, who watch their fathers abuse or degrade their mothers, will 90% of the time become abusers themselves. That is a fact. And women and girls, or girls who are raised in the household, watching their mother being abused, are very likely to become victims themselves, because it is, like I said, indoctrinated into their psyche that this is the way life is supposed to be. And a lot of people don't even realize that they are in an abusive relationship, especially if the relationship is strictly verbal or psychological. You know, just because there's no evidence of physical violence doesn't mean you're not being abused. Name calling, degrading, that is verbal abuse. It is. So a lot of people think that they aren't in an abusive, well, that's not abuse, when in fact it is. So just because someone's having a bad day, let me tell you something about that. You know,
Please.
If I have a bad day, I'm not going to abuse my boss. I'm not going to go to my boss and, you know, verbally abuse my boss or what have you. people say that domestic violence, an abuser, or he will claim or she will claim that they can't control their behavior. They most certainly can, because you don't see them abusing their boss or, somebody out on the street, another firefighter or a police officer. They know how to control their behavior. They just save that abuse for behind closed doors for what's happening. And so people think, they minimize it. That's the thing. People minimize domestic violence. And what really irritates me is people in authority, people who should know better, minimize the fact that abuse is occurring. Our attorneys, first of all, when they know that he has strangled her, which is a felony, and then they get him off, and then there's no Gwen's Law hearing, or he's posted bail or what have you, and he's been arrested multiple times for domestic abuse. What message are we sending when our college athletes who have beaten up their girlfriends, their pregnant girlfriends, and they're still allowed to play first string, first whatever on the field? What message is the college giving? I mean, it's when we ignore it, it just gets worse. When there are no consequences, people die. And I'm living proof of that. So
as you share that, we have selective amnesia. We
yes.
glamorize things that we want to glamorize. We disparage those things that we want to disparage, all because of, and I say I as a universal I, because of I should say, our universal comfortability. Because sadly, it may be a brother, it may be, and you've already mentioned, a parent, it may be a friend, etc. And if you don't, I'd like to share a personal story with you real quickly. One of the young men, sadly, he's passed on. It's sad when anybody passed. He's passed on now. But he and I were really good friends, and he and I would talk about domestic violence and how we felt strongly about not committing domestic violence, etc. Sadly, his spouse would say to me, everybody called me Chief. Chief, you don't know him. He does this. I'm like, no. And I'm being honest with you. I always thought that I was up on it. And I'm like, no. So one day I was going to visit the both of them. And as I'm driving, actually I had gotten there early and I was parked. They drove up, turned into the driveway. She jumps out of the car and starts running. But she's kind of laughing. He gets out, which really they were in a truck. He gets out of the truck on his side, and there's a tire in the back of the truck without the rim. And he actually gets this tire and flings it at her. And I'm sitting here watching this. He don't know I'm sitting there. True story. Right there in Bossier City. He don't know I'm sitting there. And then she runs in the house, gets a gun. Now he, as you just said, the tough guy who can't control his temper, who has had many conversations with me about not committing domestic violence and not being involved in domestic violence. Now, because she gets the gun, now you want to run over where I am and try to hide behind me, telling me to get it, get it. I said, I'm not getting anybody. The other thing, I'm going to help. So
yeah.
When you say what you say, I'm happy that you're sharing what you're sharing, because women need to listen very clearly. You have, and men too, you have so many people that disguise themselves really well. And many times, because we do not want to believe that they may be committing these atrocities, then we allow them to go unchecked. And to this very day, as God is my witness, KRIS, to this very day, I still think about that. I still feel badly, even though she's, revamped her life and gone on by her life, and the good Lord has taken him many years ago, and he even named me his daughter's godfather. And so that was always a contention of uneasiness for me, because
Of course, yeah.
so when you and I want to address that with you because of the thing that you said. When you encounter women, now his wife did not deny that he was committing domestic violence, but sadly, I have done several seminars. I haven't done the seminars myself, but I've been a guest for several seminars, and when we would address the ladies, many of them would be in staunch denial and would
Yes.
actually get angry when we try to share with them that many times the guy is just really a coward, and he fights them because he figured self-preservation. He figured that he's strong enough and powerful enough for they can't overcome him, but he can control them. But when it comes to other men and other odds, then they don't dare, as you've already said, lose their temper to the point they're trying to attack someone. Do you encounter, when you're sharing with women about the ugliness of this domestic violence, do you ever have any at all or many to deny that the man is abusive?
Oh, absolutely. In my line of work, being an advocate for an organization, um, a lot of times they don't want to believe, and a lot of it revolves around shame. The fact that they are very shameful that they have found themselves in a situation, and then they automatically make excuses. They make excuses for why his behavior is abusive, and they automatically blame themselves. They automatically, and in my presentations just this week, when I talk about how Charles, how he made me feel so bad about myself, and I talk about how we as women, we, instead of looking outward at when Charles would call me names or tell me that I was fat and that I was unattractive, how we instantly go inside ourselves thinking, oh my gosh, how can I change myself? What can I do? I need to lose weight. What can I do to make him love me more? Instead of saying, wait a minute, I'm perfect the way that I am. What's wrong with him? Because we're not conditioned. We're not taught that. We're not taught that we are perfect images in God's eyes. And so we instantly think we need to change ourselves somehow or another. And so women instantly think they need to change themselves. And then they think so I need to change. I need to drop this restraining order. I'm going to lose everything, and he's going to be really mad and upset, and there's nothing wrong with him. It's all me. And we face that a lot, because women, first of all, they don't want to lose the financial support, especially if they have children. They don't want to make it worse, make him more upset, mad, because she's turned on him. But she also doesn't want to admit that she has found herself in this embarrassing situation. And that was kind of my problem as well. My parents spent an exorbitant amount of money on this wedding, this beautiful wedding, and I was so ashamed. And at first I didn't want to believe that I was so ignorant that I didn't see the signs, that I just was not educated, that I thought I knew everything, and I didn't. But here's the thing. Most abusers, like Charles, they're very charismatic. The public loves them. They're very narcissistic. Charles was a firefighter. He was attractive. He was a member of his church. They all believed him. He's this vibrant man who his job is to save lives. He's smart, charismatic, all the things. And so he's very manipulative. And so he had already, and men like him, like dentists, doctors, they manipulate the system. They manipulate the police officers. the attorneys, they know how to do it. So people believe them. And she's the crazy wife, the crazy girlfriend. And that's one of the things that I fought so hard against is they will push you to lose, especially when they're messing with your children, and you try to keep your composure, and then that fear sets in and you lose your cool and you lose your mind. And then all of a sudden, and they use that against you. And then all of a sudden you're the crazy one when you are just, and when it's just literally survival. And Charles was the master at that, terrifying me, and trying to keep my cool, knowing what I needed to do, until he just pushed me over the edge. And then I was the crazy ex-wife. So,
but KRIS, before we move on, allow me to say that's the sad part, because people criminalize you. You're the abuser. And I often say, as
yes,
a big, strong, powerful man myself, is that let's just be honest with people. If I use a bully tactic and misuse somebody, the person informs me that I don't appreciate what you did to me, then I have the audacity to be upset with the person that I've abused because they won't let me abuse them.
right.
And
Yes.
to me, that's insanity.
It
I'm
is.
sorry. I'm
You
sorry.
are so correct. Yes.
That's insanity. As you share with the ladies that you share with, and you try to get them to open their eyes and to not allow people to continue to gaslight them, because they actually are being abused. And then people try to, I use the word again, they being the universal, they criminalize the person that's being abused. Do you often find them deeply depressed, or do any of them ever seek counseling for that? Taking on the mantra of becoming the bad guy, if I might say. Do any of them ever seek professional assistance to maybe come out of that
Yes.
mindset?
Yes. I mean, well, first of all, we always encourage counseling and therapy. I always do, because as we all know, especially our counselor here at DART, she can provide the tools to help a survivor get on a path of healing and hope and happiness. That's how DART served me when Miranda was killed. I mean, DART literally put me on this path of healing, and gave me the tools to survive and to pull me out of that depression, because I'm here to tell you, I didn't know how I was going to live without her. She was my life. She sustained me. She gave me breath every day. And to have your toddler snatched from you, I didn't know any other way to live. And so counseling I knew that in order for me to survive, I needed it. But yes, in a lot of times we can't make people go to therapy. We can't make people leave their abuser. We can't make our survivors do anything. But what we can do, and what I tell all of my ladies, and even men, that we can provide the tools, we can give them the resources they need, and they can make the decision on their own, because their abusers have already stripped them of their self-esteem, their autonomy, their freedoms, and they know their abuser better than anyone else. And I always like to give them the freedom to make the decisions on their own when they are ready. And let me tell you, when they're ready, they're ready. And so, but when they're not, and they go back, I have to prepare myself to be there continuously for them, because they're going to come back. They're going to come back to me. They might go back. On average, it takes 7 to 9 times for a victim to leave her abuser for good. And that's
7 to 9 times?
7 to 9 times, yes.
Wow.
And that's just goes to show you the amount, the powerful control that the abuser has on his victim. And especially hard when there are children involved. And the one thing they will go after that makes her stay are the children. And domestic abuse, leaving a domestic violence situation, is one of the number one causes of homelessness for victims of domestic violence. And when she decides to leave, of course, it's the most dangerous time for her. And if she decides to leave with just the clothes on her back, she could be living in her car or at a shelter, and then he'll threaten to take the kids. And then what happens? The family court system will take the kids because she doesn't have a job, because he hasn't allowed her to work or to finish her education. So she has no money. It is a vicious cycle. And so that is why women stay a lot of times, not because they love to be abused. You know, my grandmother even said one time, and bless her heart, I love her. She died several years ago, but she would say, well, she must, if how did she put it? Well, she must like it or she would leave. And that's, first of all, that's ignorance. But there are so many, no, she doesn't like it. She loves her abuser. She just wants the abuse to stop. And so, but I know that there are organizations like DART, like Project Celebration, who can provide resources for victims and give them those tools and counseling, free counseling, to help them pull themselves out of that depression and rebuild their self-esteem to get out of that. So,
Okay. Wow, that's heavy. Well, listen, you and I have had several conversations about this beautiful young lady in the background, this Gwen, and
yes,
we know that was a tragedy in and of itself. Will you
yes,
speak with us about Gwen and Gwen's Law?
I certainly will. So, you want me to start from the beginning?
Please.
Okay. So Charles, my ex-husband, had a brother, Mike Sally, and he was the baby. And he married Gwen. I think Gwen was Mike's third wife, I think. Anyway, they got married. And I never knew Gwen personally because I was way out of the family long after they got married. They met and got married. And they had a baby girl. Her name is Samantha. And back in, 15 years after Charles murdered Miranda and Michelle, I was sitting in Florida. Jeff and I were stationed in Florida, and I was drinking a cup of coffee, scrolling through Facebook one morning, and I came across KTVS Channel 3 news article. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, oh my God, please tell me this isn't true. And it was a picture of Mike Sally, Charles's baby brother. And Gwen had left Mike for being abusive. And he had kidnapped her. He wasn't happy about the fact that she was divorcing him. She had gotten a restraining order. But she had gone to the daycare center to pick up their little girl. But prior to that, I digress. Let me back up, because he was upset that she had left him, filed for divorce. She had packed her things, had gone to her dad's place. She had gone back to her home, and he had broken into the house. And she was there with their daughter, and he held them there at gunpoint. And Gwen somehow managed to call police. She went to the back room, called police, and he heard commotion outside. He was sitting on the sofa with their 7-year-old daughter at the time. And when he heard the commotion, he got up and he put the gun on a shelf above the fireplace mantle and went outside, and they arrested him. And they arrested him for domestic violence, domestic abuse with a firearm. And within, I think, 13 to 16 hours, he posted bail and was out. She, in the meantime, had gotten a restraining order, and he was served. He, of course, went up in flames. A few days later, he purchased an old car, drove it to the daycare center where the little girl was at after school care, and he waited for Gwen to pick up that little girl. And this is the same scenario that Charles did the same thing. So Mike drives to the daycare center, parks and stays there all day, waiting for Gwen to pick up their daughter. Gwen drives up. The daycare worker gets little girl into her booster seat. Mike jumps in the passenger side. Gwen gets out, gets little girl out and back into the daycare center. And Mike makes her drive off into a wooded area in DeSoto Parish. And police have been called, and police are in hot pursuit. And to hear her father tell the story, police are behind them, and he makes her drive up into a wooded area. Police are right behind him. Gwen gets out of the car, and Mike shoots and kills her. Shoots her in the back of the head, and then he shoots and kills himself. This is the same thing that Charles did. Actually, Gwen's sister told me that Mike told Gwen that he was going to do to her exactly what Charles did to Michelle.
Wow.
Now, he had his restraining order on the dashboard, according to Gwen's father. Also, the day that Mike was released, Gwen was never notified. But she should have been. The judge who released him, I was told, saw her in a restaurant with her sister that evening and told her. He didn't say, I let him go, I released him. He told her, watch your back. And then the next day she was dead.
What?
So yeah. And Mr. Lars, if you ever want Gwen's family on the show to tell the story, they live out in Frierson, Stonewall.
Let's make it happen. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. Samantha, the daughter, was only 7, and she is just now, since I've met her and have met the family, she's stepping out and wanting to share her mother's story. And so
let's make it happen.
Yeah. So Benny, also Gwen's father, it also shares intimate details about that scenario as well. And so it's very, very hurtful. He still has trauma. And Mr. Gary Evans, who wrote Gwen's Law, also still has a lot of trauma. He was very good friends with Gwen and actually got the law passed. It was so the law, after Gwen was murdered and Mike, shot and killed himself, Mr. Evans got the law passed, and the law basically explains that when you're arrested for domestic abuse battery, domestic abuse with strangulation, domestic abuse with child endangerment, domestic abuse with a firearm or deadly weapon, domestic abuse, and you violated a restraining order, they're all felonies now in Louisiana, then you will sit in jail until the judge decides to have a hearing. And it can be up to 5 days, which is really good because it's a cooling off period, which is what Charles and Mike never had. They post bail, boom, they're out. And still, I guess, apparently, if you've got a high-end attorney and you got money, you can still post bail without a GWEN'S law hearing, which has been happening in Shreveport and Caddo Parish and Bossier, which infuriates me, knowing that there is still felonies that these guys have committed. But so there are stipulations, but it has been proven to save lives. Also, it is not mandatory. This is what is also upsetting about GWEN'S law. When you work so hard, like Mr. Evans did, to get this law passed, the wording, it could be just 2 little words. The wording was, it used to be, or it should have been, the judges shall apply the law, and shall was taken out, and may was inserted. So they may, at their discretion, if they want to, apply GWEN'S law. And so,
now, how disingenuous is that?
Yeah,
that
right.
is extremely disingenuous, to say the least, and complicit.
Yes, very, very complicit. And there are parishes in Louisiana that don't apply it at all, and because they don't want to deal with it, they don't want the extra work, or they don't believe in the value of women, or whatever the case may be. It's not important to them. So, and let me just say this, because you mentioned earlier, Louisiana right now ranks number 5 in our nation for domestic homicide. When I moved back in 2019, because I left for 18 years, we ranked number 2 in our nation. Now, before that, we were number 1, like you said, but for, oh my gosh, 24 consecutive years, we've been in the top 10 in the entire nation for domestic homicide and domestic violence. So, and we're just a tiny little state compared to Ohio, Texas, California. So it's an embarrassment. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's an embarrassment. We're supposed to have great food and Mardi Gras and all the wonderful things about Louisiana, but we cannot protect our women or our children. Or we have no value. Let me just say that. So, so GWEN'S law has been on the books. It was passed in 2017 by our legislator, and Mr. Gary Evans wrote the law, and Teresa, GWEN'S sister, and Gary went to Baton Rouge and pushed for it and got it passed. And now we just need people, our attorneys and our judges, to push for it and to get it passed, or to get it applied. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So,
but you know what? That is the sad part of anything. People can say what they want. Men specifically can say what you want, and people try to poo-poo this very simple point I'm going to make. Without women, there is no world.
I know.
Men can't produce. We can't produce anything, and certainly can't bring a life into the world, which is what we're discussing right now. And when you have men, and this is not a pat me on the back, but when you have men that understand quite honestly and quite simply that life is produced by women. People talk about their seed and you have to feel all of this. To me as a man, that's just gaslighting, because none of us can bring children into the world, no matter how much people try to run behind the Bible and talk about the Bible says this and the Bible say that. And I'm probably going to get in trouble with a lot of my Christian friends But the truth is, even those of us that believe in the Bible, it always say what? The Bible was inspired by God. Never said God wrote the Bible, but we speak for him. So women are the ones that bring the babies into the world. Me and every other man on this planet. Yet we have the audacity not to value, just as you've already stated, women and try to marginalize. And then when you have men that speak up, then you're ostracized. Oh, you're weak, or you're this, or you're that. All of these ignorant excuses, and let me go on record to say this to you, Chris. 99% of those men that are saying that are the ones that would not dare try to accost me physically.
I wouldn't want to catch you in an alley, no, sir.
They would try to hide behind a gun.
His hands are huge. Pow, pow.
Well, they would try to hide behind a gun, behind a knife, behind a bat, behind the law.
Exactly, yes.
Behind the law. But then they try to make men like myself that understand clearly that women most certainly are valued, and try to gaslight and say we're the ones that are weak, when in fact they know that they are the ones that are weak.
Exactly.
And sadly, as you've already shared, so many women buy into that process. I think I shared this with you before at one of our meetings. Men love to, women in particular, when I was on these panels, well, I know my man's not a coward. He's a boxer. He's a footballer. I said, lady, one lady, I was just fed up. I said, lady, I said, let me help you. I said, I grew up in a house. I did. I was just fed up. I said, lady, and this, I do this as a tribute to my mother. I said, let me help you, lady. I said, I grew up in a house with a man that constantly abused my mother. I'm 14 years old, and he was afraid to fight me, but he had no problem fighting my mother. Mm-hmm. I said, so that meant he was a military guy, etc. So that means nothing. I said, furthermore, having been a star football player, these same guys that you think are so big, bad, and tough, we are around them all of the time. They're not going to fight us. They got on helmets and pads or whatever, or they know somebody's going to stop the fight. But when there's a possibility of no one stepping in, they're not near as mad anymore. Mm-hmm. I say the same thing in the boxing ring. When you start getting your behind kicked, say either if your corner doesn't throw in the towel, mm-hmm. The referee is going to stop the fight or whatever. I said, so, women need to stop being brainwashed into thinking that these guys that they are so in love with are so macho, because many of them, and I'm not hating, I'm just being honest, many of them are not. That's why I want to just share with you my personal story. This guy and I were really, I consider him a friend. And it wasn't about me. Yes, did I feel betrayed? Yes, I did. But it wasn't about me. It was about him abusing his wife. Mm-hmm. It was about him having two daughters that would have to witness that. That's where men need to step up and to be honest and quit playing games. So when you say men try to minimize women and don't think women are important, etc., I dare any one of us to produce a child, point blank. Any one of us. And even all of us that keep talking about Christianity and we're Christians, I dare any one of these preachers, and I'm talking about them all. I'm talking Joel Osteen, I am talking TD, I'm talking all. Make the women leave the church and see how long your church lasts. Because the men are not there. So the world, I'm serious, the world needs to stop gaslighting human beings and trying to hide behind the Bible. I go on record, Chris, I certainly believe that there is a supreme being. I certainly believe that God exists. I certainly have faith, but also I am an intelligent person, and I see people all the time hiding behind the Bible to mistreat other people. I often tell my own spouse, I said, we run people away from God in the name of God, and other people buy into that.
Right.
I've heard ministers and preachers say to women who encourage them to stay in abusive relationships.
Yes.
And I keep asking, and I had a friend of mine, I said, show me where that is in the Bible. They try to, well, death do us part. Show me where in the Bible it says she should remain in an abusive relationship.
Yes,
I said,
yes.
and what it tells us is that we should love our wives like God loved the church. I said, so since you want to run to the Bible, that's what I would tell them. I said, since you want to run to the Bible, are you loving your wife or your girlfriend like God loved the church? You know, God not in there breaking out the windows and tearing up the organs, and God's not doing that in the
No,
church.
I mean, if he loves the church, that's a lot of love.
Yes.
That's a lot of
So
love.
I just say that to you personally. I offer you my understanding. I offer you condolences is too strong of a word, because thank God you're still alive. But I do offer you my condolences with Miranda and other women that you've known, because this is an ugly truth that people refuse to accept, is that this is very uncomfortable. And I say to our audience, as we're talking, Chris, I ask people this one simple question. At the end of the day, or whenever things are not going well, 99.9% of us will say, wow, I can't wait to get home. And we don't let that resonate. So if I can't go home and be comfortable, where and what do I do? Thus,
Right.
domestic violence. Women have got to walk on eggshells and be afraid to put the key in the door to come in the house for fear that somebody's going to beat them up or not. So there are so many conversations that men and women refuse to have. Now, they'll have an argument, because, and that's why I said I want to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a firm believer in God. My faith is strong, but people refuse to have real conversations.
Mm-hmm.
They like to argue and try to run behind the Bible, and they like to cherry pick certain parts instead of talking about the whole process. So that's why I'm saying to you is that I really do offer you my understanding. I feel badly that you had to suffer through that. Again, I watched my mother suffer through that until my stepfather was too much of a coward to deal with me. And my mother saw what was going to happen as far as me and him. And that's the only thing that made her leave that relationship, because I firmly believe in my heart that she would have stayed there until he took her life.
Right.
Because he would put her in the hospital, break her ribs. I mean, serious stuff.
Yeah.
And so it was only a matter of time. So I speak from experience. And when I speak with you and others, you know, I tell people all of the time is that I speak from experience. So all of the gaslighting that people try to do and all of the things people try to do to make you feel bad as a woman or other women, it's just a bunch of, I can't say what I want to say, because that wouldn't be Christian. That wouldn't be Christian like.
I know. You know,
So,
I have to say,
go ahead.
That it saddens me to see, and just from my personal experience as of late, people, men especially, that support me, who will look me in the eye and say, I support you. I love what you do. Here, let me make a donation. And then I will come across their Facebook posts as of late, and the things that they are saying and posting is absolutely horrendous. I just told my husband the other day, I'm like, how can they say this and post this knowing that I'm seeing it?
Yes.
And yet they look me right in the eye and pretend. Are they pretending? Are they lying to me? Because this is hurtful, and it is demeaning, and it is atrocious. I don't even know what another word to describe it, but it's very very unchristian, and it's also it's just awful. And so I sometimes don't even know who to believe anymore. But I believe that God created us. We're man and woman were valuable to him. Okay, if we want to really go there, so Eve made a mistake. I mean, we all make mistakes, you know, but I've always felt valuable to to
Great.
my husband or to, but to have a man
Yes.
see my value,
Yes.
any man,
Yes.
I mean, that to me, that is, first of all, the most wonderful thing. Not only is it wonderful, but it's beautiful and it's sexy and it's all the
Yes.
things that that women love in a man, is
Yes.
when she feels valued and seen. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, I
Is that
do.
making sense?
Absolutely, I do. And
So
Chris, I'm happy that you're sharing that. And that let me allow me to respond as a man. That's the point that I'm making right there. Exactly. All of the things that you have said. How can I love you and I'm knocking your teeth out? How can I
yeah,
love you and I'm slapping you all over the place? How can I love you and I'm giving you a black eye? How can I love you and you are so nervous that sometimes you don't know what to go or come, things like that, or
yeah,
you're afraid that I'm going to hurt you and that kind of thing. And you know what? That is the utmost insult. And I have said to my wife on many occasions, I said, what people don't want to accept is we all know that sometimes people exaggerate and make up things and lie on people. We all know that. But the sad part is that there are so many people that do the things to women that they say that we are doing. And I tell that as a man. I said, then there are those of us that may get accused of things that we would not ever do. So it's a quagmire, it's a catch-22. And like you mentioned, those guys that put things up and the things they say about women and the way they treat women and stuff like that. It's just not something that's acceptable. And it's a very ugly situation. That's why I wanted to share with you about my friend.
yeah,
It's just, it was, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. It was very embarrassing. As I said, it's not about me, but it was very, I was mad at myself. And I'm saying this to you publicly. I was mad at myself because I did not listen to her when she was telling me, about the things and things like that. So until men, Chris, actually have real conversations, then we're going to continue to have this foolishness to continue and to go unchecked.
exactly. And I think too,
Yes,
and if I'm talking to a classroom, a college classroom, or a football team, or the baseball team, I challenge the men to hold their teammates or their buddies accountable
absolutely.
for for abusing or witnessing abuse when they see it happening. Like, call your buddy
Absolutely.
over and say, "Hey man, don't what are you doing? This is wrong." Because
Absolutely.
instead of, you know, um,
Just ignoring it, acting like it didn't
ignoring it,
happen.
and yeah, because you're just you're just fueling it. When you don't speak up and say something, you are letting them know that it's okay. And
Absolutely.
as men, and even as women, we need to call it out. Because if we
Yes.
don't talk about it, we don't call it out, bring it to the forefront, and put it on display, it's not going to stop.
Yeah. And that's a sad thing. It really is.
Yeah,
Well, listen, I really didn't intend to keep you this long, but I know when you and I start talking about
yeah,
things
it's
like
always
this, the
great.
conversation,
Yes,
the conversation keeps rolling. And thank you for coming back and sharing with us about Gwen's Law and sharing with the audience who, by the way, the hearts have never stopped going up, the thumbs have never stopped going up, the tears have never stopped going up, etc.
well,
And
thanks everybody.
I just want you to know how much you are appreciated and what you're sharing. And
Thank you,
I hear
Mr.
you.
Lars, for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Well, listen, Miss Chris Anglin Barney, the pleasure is all ours. And this has been the Nobody Asked Me Guy Show. I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars. And as always, we appreciate and thank you for being here. I know that you've been inspired, and I know that you've learned a lot from what you heard tonight coming from Miss Chris Anglin Barney. Domestic violence is never a beautiful thing, obviously. It's always heart-wrenching and devastating to many families. However, we thank you guys for coming and joining us. Ms. Barney, is there any information you'd like to leave for them to contact you?
Well, you can contact me through my Facebook. KRIS, ANGLIN, BARNEY, or the Miranda Faith Memorial Foundation page through Facebook, or email hkbarney@yahoo.com, or the Miranda Faith, mirandafaith.org. That is my website. So yeah, that's all the ways you can contact me.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, guys, so listen, again, thank you for being here tonight, guys. Listen, don't forget, tell a friend. Go to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Make sure you like and subscribe. And I keep repeating every show. When you get there, you're not going to find anything that say $1.99, $3.99, or whatever. Our subscription is totally free. We just would love to have your presence. So again, guys, we thank you. Ms. Anglin.
Yes, sir.
We love and appreciate you, dear. We thank you for being here with us. We want you to have a great and blessed night.
Well, I love and appreciate you too, and thank you for having me once again. Let's do it again.
Thank you. We shall.
Yes, sir.
Good night.
All right. Good night.